All aboard! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, football fans of all ages, I am Beast Mikey. You've now arrived in the train of thought. It's time to talk about the power rankings. And this week's theme was a little tricky to come up with, but I did find a way. Here's what I did. So, last week I talked about the 4 teams and my belief in them in terms of winning the title. But this week I'm going to talk about the 4 games. And I'm going to do it in a way of competitive nature. As in, what game will be the least competitive to what game do I think will be the most competitive amongst the 4 college football playoff games. That's how I'm going to do this. First, I'm going to talk about the Notre Dame versus Indiana zombie tier. I think Indiana's going to get blown out. It just feels like a bad matchup for them. As long as Riley Leonard's halfway decent, I think Notre Dame's going to win like 44-20 or 44-17, something like that. Anyway, the Battle of Indiana zombie tier. Las Vegas almost accidentally won. I don't know what the Falcons were thinking. I don't know what the Falcons were doing. Maybe Kirk Cousins is just absolutely cooked. And he looks old and he looks finished, perhaps. Either way, Aiden O'Connell got nothing done, and they got nothing going on the ground at all for a lot of this game until the very end of this game, which was kind of wild. The fact that this game came down to 2 Hail Mary opportunities, and neither of them went to Brock Bowers specifically, which, again, kind of wild. But maybe the Raiders understood the assignment by not throwing to Bowers, because he's probably going to catch it. And that would mean they lose out on Shedeur or Cam Ward, if he did catch it. So maybe the Raiders knew what they were doing by almost accidentally winning. New York Giants, 3 more weeks. You're in a similar boat as the Raiders. Don't accidentally win and find your way into not getting Sanders or Ward. Because if you did, you probably miss out on one of them and give a team like Tennessee a golden opportunity to get them. Don't do that to yourselves, Giants. You screwed yourselves once by winning too much and allowing the Commanders to get Jaden Daniels. Tennessee, no more mayo. And yeah, this is generally a good thing. I'm not a fan of mayonnaise. I think mayonnaise smells terrible. But anyway, Will Levis is not playing now. He got benched for Mason Rudolph. So maybe Tennessee might jeopardize their own futures by doing this and having a competent quarterback in play. But that's what they're going with. They're actually not trying to tank, which is admirable of them, I suppose. Anyway, Tennessee's got 3 more weeks left of this as well. They got a divisional game against the Colts, so maybe they will play the role of doormat and allow Indy to make it to the playoffs or get closer to the playoffs. We will see. But in any way, shape, form, and event, Tennessee's got 3 more weeks of this, and then they could try to find their quarterback in the future and keep things rolling. Jacksonville, Brian Thomas impresses. They got it right with this pick. Brian Thomas looks like he could be legitimately a number 1 receiver, which is a really good look for a team that definitely needed one of those. And there are some redeemable pieces here. There's obviously the likes of Trevor Lawrence, if he's healthy, and Travis Etienne, who are decent pieces. But they're going to have to figure out the head coaching thing, whether it's Doug Peterson or not. I'd have to think it won't be. But they're going to have to figure it out immediately for the 2025 season, because they won't go anywhere until they get that part right to go along with Lawrence. And then an offensive line needs some help. And then the defense, especially the secondary, needs some help. They need some things to go right. They got to do them immediately. Chicago, just lose out. At this point, there's really nothing else you can really do here. Chicago is just bad at football and have just not recovered. And it feels like they're structurally not sound. Will they ruin Caleb Williams? I think that's too early to say. Depending on whoever their new head coach will be, I think it's too early to say they're going to ruin Caleb. But they're going to have to do something to fix that culture, because it just doesn't look right. They just look kind of sort of lifeless after the early goings of games now. And when things really don't go their way, they just kind of sort of check out. Not great. New England, ignored and expected. That's what this last game was. There really wasn't much to it. The Cardinals were a vastly superior team, way further along in terms of their rebuilding and heading towards the playoffs type of march. New England's in kind of, I would say, year 1, because they might have the quarterback, but they don't really have much of anything else except for a couple of dudes on defense. Like, I like Kyle Duggar, and I like Ramondre Stevenson to an extent on offense, obviously, and I like Gottschall, who's a good player. Christian Gonzalez, I think, can be an excellent corner. but they don't have too much else, and they need to build everything else in order for them to get back to the contending tiers. Cleveland, self-destruction masterclass. Just when it looked like the Browns were kind of sort of turning a corner a couple of weeks ago after beating the Steelers, they have kind of turned it into a brick wall. They obviously got run by the Saints, and then they looked bad in the Pittsburgh rematch where the Steelers got their lick back, and then they self-destructed in a very Cleveland Brownsy way with 6 turnovers, 4 of them being Innos, and Jameis Winston got benched after 3 of them. DTR will be the starting quarterback going forward, which is a shame because I did like the Jameis Winston experience. It was fun. It was fun while it lasted, I guess. But unfortunately, the Browns are going to go with DTR. Will the Browns draft a quarterback? I have to hope that they will, because they don't have their one of the future on this roster unless DTR balls out in these last 3 games. And Carolina, back to reality. After almost a month of not being in zombie tier, the Panthers are back there after a really deflating and ugly loss to Dallas. Okay, sure, you lose to 3 straight division leaders in the Bucks, the Eagles, and the Chiefs. All of them one-score games. All of them, arguably, you had chances to win. But this one was not any of that. And this was a pummeling by the Cowboys when Dallas needed to win the most. Sure, it helps Carolina in terms of their drafting. Sure, it helps them rebuild and build around Bryce Young. Okay, fine, I get all that. It just looked really bad, and it's just really unfortunate to see a Panthers team that looked like they were making some strides end up striding backwards. Just 3 more games, Carolina. You'll be okay. Get your defense back healthy again, especially with Derek Brown and with Shaq Thompson and company. But you just got 3 more games of this, and hopefully you can figure something out for the 25 season. Let's get to the Penn State SMU Monkey's Paw tier. I don't think this game will be as lopsided as Notre Dame, because I think SMU is legitimately a pretty good team. I just think they're outclassed. I think this will be a good game for Penn State, where Drew Aller does his thing, and Penn State runs the ball against a, I think, pretty good SMU run defense, even though it is a little misleading, considering they face a lot of bad rushing attacks. And I think Penn State will be able to get to Jennings, their quarterback from SMU. Give me something like a 37-20 Nittany Lion win. SMU will put up a fight early, but I think Penn State will overwhelm them in the 3rd quarter and take care of business in the 4th. Anyway, let's get to the tier. New York Jets. Vintage Rodgers and Adams. So we got a glimpse of what New York Jets fans thought they were going to get when they traded for Aaron Rodgers and then traded for Davante Adams a year and change later. We got dominance. We got destruction. We got mayhem. It was all for a half. It was against a terrible Jaguars pass defense, but we all saw it. They got 200 yards together in 2 tugs. This was dominance. And it was also too late, and it's probably also maddening, not to be confused with Woody Johnson's thoughts of Jerry Jeudy, but it was also maddening probably for Jets fans, I would say, because, where was this when we needed it? Where was this when we had actual stakes on the line? Now, instead, you're losing draft order and draft capital. Not great. Will Aaron Rodgers be a Jet next year? I'd have to think no. Will Davante Adams be a Jet next year? I'd have to think he goes where Rodgers goes. But this was at least a very good sign of, unless he retires. If Aaron Rodgers retires, then okay, cool, Adams probably stays. But I have to think this was a very good sign of, they could still do this on occasion. Are they able to do this full on? I'd say no. But on occasion, they can still pull off games like this. New Orleans, squandered gift. If you saw the end of the Saints game, and I don't blame you because it wasn't all that great, you may have seen that New Orleans were given an extra 4 or 5 seconds because the referees completely botched running the clock. Otherwise, the Saints probably run out of time in terms of trying to spike the ball, and they don't get the touchdown to Foster Moreau in the first place, let alone going for 2, where they had an opportunity and they kind of screwed themselves by doing a QB rollout and taking away half the field. Not great there. Anyway, New Orleans probably ran out of time in terms of making the playoffs, and to be honest, I'm not sure I wanted to see them there anyway, considering all the injuries they had to all their key players, the last of which being Alvin Kamara, who left that game early and didn't come back to it. Will Kamara be back healthy for this game? We will see. San Francisco, Purdy price point. So how much do you pay Brock now? Do you pay him amongst the high-tier guys in terms of finances? Do you pay him amongst the high-tier guys in terms of their high-tier ability? Where do you put him? Where do you slot him? I think Purdy is a good QB. Does he need a better squad around him than most? Yes, I think he does. I think it's obvious he does. We've seen it this year. When Voltron needs some repairs in some different spots, it's not looking great for Purdy. Debo hasn't looked good, and Ayuk's been out for a while, and CMC hasn't really played this year. We've seen that. Kittle's been very good, but we just haven't seen the Brock Purdy we've seen for a couple of years now, in part because there's just too many injuries. Never mind the fact that Devondre Campbell quit on them. Okay, cool, that happened, and that was really, really a bad look for them. But Purdy's just not the guy to multiply things, and that's okay. It's just a matter of how much the Niners are willing to pay for him. I'm not sure the Niners pay him. I think it's on the board to me that he's not a Niner or he's franchise tag. We'll see what happens, though. Dallas. Where was this? I get it was against a bad Panther team, but this was a very impressive performance by the Cowboys. Sure, it's with Cooper Rush and not with Dak Prescott. That's another part of this that probably should be explained, but we already know that. This was a really good performance by the defense, especially. They forced a lot of turnovers, forced a lot of chaos. Micah Parsons got home a few times. This was a very good performance on their part. Will Dallas run out of time to make the playoffs? Probably. They'd have to win out and get a whole lot of help. And their schedule to end the year is not nice. You got Tampa Bay this week. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then there's the Eagles. And then there's the Commanders again. It's not nice. Dallas will run out of time. They may have run out of wins. And they're going to probably draft very high in the 2025 draft. Take Aston Jeanty and run. Atlanta. Unnecessary risk. I think they have to do this. They have to see what Mike Penix is. And at the very least, they can build the foundation for their future next year. Maybe they don't sound so dumb for drafting a quarterback 8th overall, knowing about Kirk Cousins after signing him a month earlier. And yeah, they're going to have a probably bad dead cap hit if Kirk Cousins gets released. Sure, fine. You can spread it out over 2 years. The Broncos have shown you can do that. But now we can see what Penix is. And is Penix who he was at Washington, or is he what he was in Indiana? What is Mike Penix? Can he make things happen and save the Falcons season? Can they get to the playoffs? That's going to be hard considering Tampa Bay's schedule remaining is very nice. Far nicer than Dallas, with exception to Dallas. But Atlanta's at least in an okay spot in terms of their quarterback situation because they supposedly might have theirs of the future. Indianapolis, season-changing play. That's what Jonathan Taylor's drop at the goal line feels like. And they never really recovered from that. It took the Broncos a little bit to get their win back after that, but they got it together and made the fourth quarter relatively easy, even though the Colts were dominating up until the Taylor fumble. The Colts' schedule is incredibly easy at the end, and Indy should have no problems winning all three and possibly making the playoffs with a little bit of help. But this was not a good game at least not a good quarter for the Colts. And if they miss the playoffs, that's going to be the point where everything changed. What happens to Chris Ballard if they miss the playoffs, though? Does he get fired? What happens to Anthony Richardson? Does he get replaced? Questions I'll need answers to. Arizona, free win. Like with the Patriots, there's not much to say here. This was an easy win for the Cardinals. They did what they were supposed to do. Nobody watched because of the two main events that happened at the same time. You got your free win in the shadows. You're now 7-7. You're not dead when it comes to the playoffs. You're not dead when it comes to your division, but you're going to need a little bit of help to get the ladder. Can you get it? Will you get it? And Cincinnati, dominant defense. For once, that's what happened here. The score is misleading to me, considering how well the Bengals played on defense. They got the turnovers. They got a pick six. They should have had another defensive touchdown, thanks to another drop at the 1 yard line. But they looked really good on defense for once. And yes, it was against an inferior Titans team, but you did it for once, and that's a good thing. You might have to do it again against the Browns because the weather's not going to be nice in Ohio, but we'll see what happens with this. And this is a game I'm going to talk about because there's some other layers to talk about it with. Because Joe Burrow has been owned by Myles Garrett over the years. We'll see what happens there. let's get to the Clemson versus Texas playoff tier. I think this game will actually be relatively interesting. I think Clemson's going to put up a fight and keep this game within a score. I saw the line was about 11.5 a couple of days ago. I don't think Texas will cover that. Something like a 27-20 or 30-23 type time. Give me Texas by a touchdown, something like that. Miami, freezing cold take. Remember when Tua said right before the Packer game that he couldn't wait to kill narratives? Yeah, not only did Pepperidge Farm remember, but so does everyone else. The Dolphins are 1-4 this year against teams over 500. The Cardinals are 7-7. And the Colts are 6-8, obviously, so those don't count. And obviously, Tua wasn't in the Colt game. But anyway, Dolphins are 1-4 against teams over 500. And in 2 of the games, Tua has looked awful. He looked awful in the first Bills game before the concussion. And then he looked awful here against Houston in a game that Miami had to have. And it was a one-score game because the defense played pretty well. It's just unfortunate that 2 of the 4 turnovers that Tua had were really, really terrible, and I would say inexcusable. The first and the last one, I don't fault him for that. Stingley made a play on the last one. Will Anderson made a play on the first one. The middle 2, really, really bad NOs that Tua tried to force-feed Tyreek Hill the ball on. Just bad looks. And with no Jalen Waddle there for the second half of this game, it made things a whole lot easier for the Texans defense, and Tua and company didn't adjust. Just not a good look. The defensive performance was kind of wasted. And it's a defense where if Miami had played a little bit better against the Cardinals or the Bills on that end, they win those 2 games and are not 6-8. Instead, minimum 8-6. It may be higher than that if Tua were healthy. But it's the way this season goes. Washington escaped. And yes, I talked about it with the Saints, with the clock malfunction and clock mismanagement by the refs. But it really shouldn't have gotten to that point. For some reason, the Commanders played with their food. Despite the brilliance of Jayden Daniels and Terry McLaurin, the Commanders were still only up a score on the Saints with minimal time left before all the clock mismanagement. It shouldn't have gotten this far. It shouldn't have been this close. But you won. And you're over 500. And you got 9 wins. And that's okay. It's a really good come-up year for the Commanders. I think Washington is probably one and done in the playoffs, but it's a far better deal than what you had for the last 15 years. And in some cases, you even mistakenly, stubbornly stumbled into the playoffs and were easy one and dones for the most part. This one may be just as easy of a one and done, but at least there's a future here. Keep building, Commanders. Keep building. Seattle. Will Geno play? That was as bad of a performance as they needed to have it. And several teams had them. I just talked about Miami having a bad one. There's another team in this tier I'll talk about shortly that had an awful performance. And in this Seattle case, it was gotta have it, need to keep up with the Rams, need to keep things moving in the NFC West. And they were really bad at stopping Josh Jacobs. They were really bad at protecting Geno Smith, where he took a horrible beating. Geno did throw some minnows, but it was a bad time to have an awful performance for Seattle. Can they make the playoffs? Sure, they absolutely can. They're not out of play here. They got the Rams coming up, but it's an awful time to have what would have been a big time win if they were to get it against the Packers. But now Geno Smith's health. Is he going to be able to play? It's a big question. And I wonder the same about Kenneth Walker. I wonder the same about Zach Charbonnet. These are 3 of their, I would say, 5 most important players on offense. The other 2 obviously being Jackson Smith-Njigba and DK Metcalf. And a very close 6 being Tyler Lockett, of course. But I do need to see if Seattle's going to be healthy down the stretch. If they're not, then they don't have much of a shot to make the playoffs without those dudes. Houston, defense carried. And I also give some credit to the special teams too, because that fake punt reverse was really good. That was a great play design that Danny Crossman and the Dolphins special teams did not either A, see coming, or B, were not prepared for. It was a bad look, no matter how much they say they're prepared for it. That's a fireable offense if you prepared for it and still failed horribly to stop it. Anyway, the Texans did well to capitalize off Miami mistakes. They've got 7 off of that punt fake reverse play. It was a great play there. They got 7 off of that fumble, the strip sack fumble, with Will Anderson getting home, and Tua had no shot on his blind side, and they got 3 off the NO and return by Lassiter and setting them up right before the half. So that's 17 of Houston's 20 points they scored in that game based off of self-destruction by the Dolphins or great ingenuity by the Texans off that fake punt reverse. Anyway, this Houston defense, if they're playing like this, can do damage against a lot of teams, considering they have 2 elite pass rushers on the opposite sides. They have a secondary that can take the ball from you. They did all this without Jalen Petrie, by the way, who is a really good safety. We'll see if Petrie is able to come back for this stretch run. But anyway, this is a very good defense when it wants to be, when it's able to be aggressive, when it's able to attack. When the offensive line can actually stop teams from getting home to Stroud, because Miami got there, and a lot of teams can get home and get to Stroud, then Houston can become really, really dangerous. Joe Mixon's health is also going to be in question. He did leave parts of that Dolphins game twice, and he was not very good when he played in said game. Can Mixon help stem the tide for the Texans? If not, then they're going to be an easy 4 seed out where they get mauled by whoever doesn't win the AFC North. That's what we're dealing with the Texans. They're a good team, but they still feel like a one-and-done team at home, but at least they'll get the home revenue from the wild card round. LA Chargers, big game disaster. Yeah, this is the other team in this tier that had a monster game at home and got absolutely boat raced in it. It was awful. Herbert wasn't very good. They somehow, usually elite Charger defense was pretty awful after the first quarter, and I would say really more so in the second half. Baker and Mike Evans looked like Young to Rice or Montana to Rice. They could not be stopped. Or the 1 year Brady to Moss, get well soon Randy Moss. It just did not look good at all for the LA Chargers. They had to have that game to keep up in the AFC playoffs. They failed miserably in getting said game in the AFC playoff race. They have a big one tonight that I will absolutely be talking about momentarily. LA Rams, very dangerous team. When the Rams are clicking, when the Rams have things rolling on their defensive side and can actually get some stops like they did against the Niners, things look promising. I've mentioned many times, I love what the Rams have done when it comes to their front on the defensive side. With the 2 Seminoles and Durant, they are a nasty crew up front, and they should be for years to come. That's terrifying. And then you pair that up with an offense in normal conditions of Stafford and Kupp and Williams and Nakua. They are a nasty front on that end. Now, obviously, the weather had something to do with the lack of offense last Thursday night in San Francisco, or Santa Clara, if you will. But they look like they could be a nasty crew when things are rolling and when things are anywhere close to ideal and optimal. The Rams are going to be a real tough out in these playoffs if they are to get there. Tampa Bay, 2:51 to go. That is the yardage total that Mike Evans needs to get to another 1,000-yard season. He put up a big chunk last Sunday against the Chargers. And in these last 3 games, he's got a good opportunity, I would say, to get these 251 yards to get back to 1K. He's got the Panthers again. He's got the Saints again. But before this, he's got the Cowboys. And he usually does fairly well against Dallas. So we'll see if Baker, who has been really good this year, if he can get the rock to Mike Evans and he can make things happen with Mike Evans on Sunday Night Football. And Denver. Biggest game since. That's what tonight feels like to me. Yeah, the Broncos took advantage of Indianapolis' really dumb mistakes. And Anthony Richardson, yikes, that was not a good game on his part. Lots of NOs were thrown, and Bo Nix threw 3 of them. Let's not get confused. Bo Nix was also not very good in this game. But Denver took advantage of the Colts' mistakes way more than the Colts did Denver's, and now this is where Denver's at. Denver's a win away from making the playoffs, or basically being a mortal lock to make them. Can they get them? This is, tonight, the biggest game the Broncos have had since maybe the Colts game last week, and before that, maybe Super Bowl 50? The Broncos have missed so many playoff years in a row, I can't think of a game in between. It's that big, it's that huge, it's that consequential. Denver's a good team for once, and they could legitimately make the postseason if they are able to win this game this evening. And now let's get to the Tennessee versus Ohio State title tier. I don't think either of these teams are winning the title. Don't get it confused. But I do think that Tennessee is going to upset the Buckeyes. I do. I think Ohio State's defense is really good. They're number one in several key stats in terms of points and yards allowed. Unfortunately, Tennessee's in the peer group. Tennessee is top 5 in this peer group. They are a really good defense. And Tennessee's defensive line, I think, can be really, really nasty when it comes to getting home and causing chaos and making things happen against an offensive line in Ohio State's that's proven himself to not be all that great lately. They also have a quarterback who I think is better than Will Howard. I think Nico's just better than Will Howard is. Give me a 27-23 Volunteers upset win, and this may spell the end of Ryan Day as Buckeye coach. Anyway, let's get to the title tier. Baltimore, got right game. Not much to say about the Ravens-Giants game because Lamar Jackson basically did all the talking. 5 tutties, way more than the incompletions. Though we didn't get much of Derrick Henry, I don't think we had to have much of Derrick Henry in this game. Save him for games that are coming up, like the one they're going to have against Pittsburgh. Finally gets ball. After Najee Harris fumbled deep in Eagles territory, the Eagles decided to run a 22-play drive that burned the last 10 minutes off the clock. They didn't bother giving the Steelers the ball back. They didn't bother trying to score. They just said, we're going to run this ball down your throats. We're going to run the clock out and completely send you back to Pittsburgh with an L. That is got to be as demoralizing as it gets for the Eagles to be able to run 10 minutes off the clock and basically bully the Steelers, who have built their reputations off of bullying people. Will they get TJ Watt, though? I would think yes. Watt will try to play. But how effective will he be? Because usually, it's similar to what Myles Garrett does to Joe Burrow. Watt and company have owned Lamar Jackson over the years. Can Watt be healthy enough to do it this time? If he's not, then Pittsburgh's chances of being the 2 seed may go up in smoke because Baltimore may take them away from them. Green Bay, very impressive performance. That was really good to see from the Packers. Their defense is really coming along strong, and you see Josh Jacobs is still doing his thing. The Packers are looking nice in terms of the receivers. Jalen Reed had an outstanding game. Romeo Doubs should be back soon enough, or good to go, and healthy and all that. It's like the Packers are getting closer to full strength, and that's terrifying. Will Jair Alexander be back? If so, and a full-strength Packer team can be incredibly dangerous in the playoffs, and it would not shock me at all if they live up to my my preseason prediction of them getting to the NFC Championship. Minnesota, they're going to have to go through these Vikings, though, can finish first. There is a path for the Vikings to have the 1 seed. It's simple. Win out. Their magic number to that is 3. Can the Vikings do that? It's very doable. They get the Packers next week. It's a monster game. One game I will not be talking about in the games of interest is Minnesota-Seattle. I thought about it too. I really did. I was concerned about Geno Smith playing because that injury did not look great. And if he doesn't play, then there is minimal shot at all for Sam Howell, to me, against a really good and really aggressive defense that Minnesota's bringing with Brian Flores' crew. I think Minnesota wins the game either way, but it becomes less competitive, way less competitive, if there's no Geno Smith in there. Anyway, Minnesota with a good win. You did what you were supposed to against a bad Bears team, and you kept it pushing. If you win out, you are the 1 seed, and you will have absolutely earned it. Detroit, so many injuries. This is why the path for Minnesota getting the 1 seed is incredibly clear. And Minnesota controls their own fate in terms of getting it. Because, these injuries Detroit are dealing with is ridiculous. They got almost an entire defense on IR right now. That's how wild this is. That's how crazy this is. Maybe Detroit gets healthier in the playoffs, and I'm not sure there's any elite team in the NFL that needs a bye more than these guys do. And if Detroit can get it, then they may have a real shot of pulling this off. If Detroit does not get it, then this could get really bad, and a season that looked like it was going to be a fever dream could be a really big-time nightmare if the Lions can't get their first-round bye. The other NFC team that can get the 1 seed, Philadelphia. They aren't crumbling. This isn't like last year's team, where last year's team self-destructed inexplicably. Maybe they've learned from their mistakes, and that's a very good thing to see. I talked about how they bullied the Steelers at the very end and running out the entire rest of the game. from the last 10 and a half minutes of it. That's impressive. And to be honest, the game should have never been that close. This should have been over and done with probably in the first half. But they had 2 killer fumbles that took away possessions. The Steelers only got 6 points on those possessions. So it was not a good look for the Steelers at all in this game against the Eagles. The Eagles were vastly the superior team. Philly can absolutely get the 1 seed. They just need some help. The easiest path of resistance is the Eagles winning out and both of the North teams, i.e. the Lions and the Vikings, to lose a game apiece. They play Week 18, but they need the winner of that game to also have a loss before said game. Because if they both win out until 18, then it's a dead end. And the Eagles are settling for the 2 seed and no bye. Buffalo, Allen is MVP. No other way to say it. I think this race is effectively done. And even worse, Allen can pretty much lap the field with 3 dominant performances against the Patriots twice and the Jets in between. This could get even worse in terms of the distance between Allen and I would say second place is Saquon Barkley for MVP status. And third probably being Lamar Jackson at this moment in time. But Allen's done so much in these last 2 weeks and overall this year with the talent he has around him or lack thereof, where I think the award is his and it's going to be incredibly hard for him not to have it. But Kansas City is number 1. Does Mahomes play? This is a very interesting question. So Kansas City's got 2 games on Buffalo. Buffalo does have the head-to-head tiebreaker, but Kansas City's got 2 games on them in terms of the 1 seed. The Chiefs just need to win twice. Unfortunately, their end-of-season schedule might be the hardest in the league. They have 3 playoff teams currently that they have to play to close out their year. And they're doing 2 of them in a span of 4 days. Ooh, not great. And 3 of them in a span of 2 in about, 2 weeks? Time? Not great situation for Kansas City with Mahomes on the high ankle sprain. And they've got pass rushers to deal with in all 3 of those cases. Nick Bonino is proving himself to be a really good player this year, and he's going to be last on that list. And against a Denver team that's going to want nothing more than to cause more pain to Kansas City and get their lick back after that block kick. And then before that, Pittsburgh. And then before that, again, I'll talk about with Houston momentarily. But let's get to the games of interest now that we're here. And we're going to start with the zombie tier games. Jaguars-Raiders is peak zombie tier status. This is epic AFC Championship zombie-style game in Vegas, where the winner really loses and the loser really wins. And if it's the Raiders, then you might be able to say goodbye to Shedeur Sanders. And if it's the Jaguars, you might be able to say goodbye to Travis Hunter or Will Campbell or Kevin Banks or any number of people can be involved in this situation. This is a very, very high-stakes tank game, and we can see who could be the true AFC king of the zombie tiers. And then we'll get to the Battle of Ohio, Browns and Bengals. I don't know if either team is in charge of sacrificing what they need to for Ohio State to win the college football playoff. I don't know who's in charge of this. Maybe both teams have some responsibility here. Maybe it's sacrificing a bad Joe Burrow game and a bad Myles Garrett game. Maybe that's what we're doing here. I don't know about the rules in Ohio here. But what I do know is that Myles Garrett over the years has done really well against Joe Burrow and has dominated Joe Burrow head-to-head in terms of wins and losses. Earlier this year, obviously, the Bengals won this game. It was not great, though. It wasn't pretty. Myles Garrett and company did their thing. They did make some things happen against Burrow and contained them pretty well. What happens here? What happens in the game of the Bengals absolutely got to have? And they're doing this, obviously, the Browns are, with DTR as QB1. What happens in this game? It'll be a very interesting situation in Cincinnati. Let's get to the Monkey's Paw tier games. Giants, Falcons, Mike Penix's first NFL start. The Giants, who have a really good defensive line, can get busy against a lot of teams. Atlanta's got a really good offensive line, and they can stop people from getting busy. Conversely, the other side of this, Falcons were able to feast on a terrible Raider team. I'd have to think the Falcons are going to be able to do the same against an equally terrible Giants team. The Giants understand the stakes just as much as the Raiders do. You win, you might not get to Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. You lose, you almost guarantee yourself such a thing. And for the Falcons, you need to win to keep up with Tampa Bay because They play the Cowboys Sunday Night Football. This game somehow did not get flexed. There's a lot of good AFC games, and this game didn't get flexed out of it. Anyway, the Cowboys and the Bucs. Dallas is still remotely alive for the playoffs. Tampa Bay is in control of their own fate in terms of the NFC South and the 4 seed. A critical game. Who covers Mike Evans? Can anyone cover Mike Evans? Will Baker Mayfield force feed Mike Evans to get him closer to 1,000 yards receiving? Bucky Irving, does he continue his really good rookie play? Dallas, do they keep up the momentum that they had from last week? Or was that just a flash in the pan and they get their doors blown off? What happens on Sunday Night Football? And why this is still said game in said spot, I don't know. Well, maybe it's because Cowboys, but this does not feel like a 13-10 type game. This does not feel like a game where Micah Parsons, who I do think will get a sack or so, completely overwhelms and dominates, and the Cowboy defense especially, overwhelms and dominates the Tampa Bay unit. But it's going to be a fun game worth seeing. Let's get to the playoff tier games, and we're going to stay in the NFC East for this one game. This is the last NFC game we're going to talk about. Eagles-Commanders, and this would not have been here had Geno Smith been healthy. It would have absolutely been Vikings-Seahawks. We saw when these two teams played round one. It was a measuring stick game for both squads, and the Eagles were vastly superior. The big part of this was that Terry McLaurin was absolutely locked down by Quinyon Mitchell. I don't think Darius Slay played in the game, and I'm not sure it really even mattered that he did or didn't, because Quinyon Mitchell did an outstanding job on McLaurin, and Jaden Daniels really didn't look his way. Now, Daniels didn't look all that healthy in said game either. He looks healthier now, but this is still a monster game going down in D.C., Landover, Maryland. I've been to FedEx Field. It's still FedEx Field to me. And we're going to see if Washington can learn from their previous mistakes. If they can, then they're well in line for the playoff picture, and they keep the Eagles from clinching the East on their field. If they cannot, then the Eagles do clinch their division on their field, and the Eagles can still stay alive for that 1 seed, because a loss just feels like it's probably the end of it. 2 losses definitely are the end of it, but a loss would make things a lot harder in terms of getting the 1 seed based off of the Lions' schedule left, even though they got Minnesota at the end and the injury issues that they have. And now let's get to the last 3 games. They are the AFC games here of real interest, the next 3 games that we're all going to watch. First, it's the Broncos-Chargers tonight. A monster game and a monster rematch. We saw in round 1 that the Chargers relatively dominated this game pretty easily and pretty efficiently. We saw what Justin Herbert and company did. He didn't have to do too much. And the other part of this was the Charger defense absolutely confusing and absolutely locking down Bo Nix, where Nix couldn't do much of anything of relevance in this game. And this was a really good performance by the Charger unit. J.K. Dobbins was a key part of that game, will not be a key part of this one. And that's going to be a major piece to this game, and whether the Chargers offense can do anything against a good Denver defense. The Denver defense is legitimately good. What happens tonight in LA? Will the Chargers lose their second important game in 4 days? Will the Broncos get closer to the playoffs? A vital game that we need to see on Amazon Prime. Hopefully this game will not suck like a lot of games have on that service. These 4 teams in title tier may stay here for next week. There is an NFC game I'm looking at for title tier, and it may take one of them out, but we'll see how this goes. It's title tier, and it's going to be Texans-Chiefs. Monster game on Saturday, and both these games are Saturday games, by the way. Texans and Chiefs. Will Pat Mahomes play against a really good Houston pass rush with a really bad offensive line that the Chiefs have in order to protect them? Their weak spots are where Kansas City could absolutely get exploited, and that's their tackle positions. I am very concerned that Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter could ruin Pat Mahomes' playoff run before it even begins if they are able to get home and if he is able to play. It's a vital game, and it's going to be a monster situation for Houston. Houston needs a prove-it game. They need a get-right game. Yeah, they beat Buffalo this year, but obviously the Texans have not looked good in a lot of their games. They didn't look good against the Colts twice. They didn't look good against the Dolphins last week. There were games where they struggled and survived and won, and we need to see if Houston can do that against a heavyweight team, another one anyway, because they already have the Bills on their mantle. Vital game, monster game, and if Kansas City loses this game, Buffalo's golden opportunity for the 1 seed gets that much more clear with Kansas City's schedule left. And the main event for this week, Fox's guy who did the narrating for the commercial, he said it best. You know what it is. It's Ravens versus Steelers, showdown in Baltimore, a game where Lamar Jackson has absolutely been owned for a lot of his career by TJ Watt and that crew. The Steelers had done whatever they wanted to, whenever they wanted to Lamar Jackson. They've been the only team to really do that consistently. We'll see what happens if TJ Watt is able to play. If he is, then Watt and Highsmith and Preston Smith and all those dudes who can get home and get after people and make life miserable for the Ravens, they could all come back and get at Lamar. It's a vital game for the AFC North because if Pittsburgh wins, the division's over and the Steelers clinch it. If the Steelers lose, then it's a golden opportunity for Baltimore to catch them. They would be tied. They would be even in the division with 2 to play. And both teams playing an Ohio team in Week 18. The game in between, Pittsburgh has the Chiefs. So you know it's a monster game that Pittsburgh's going to have to try to win. And the Ravens could absolutely steal this division if they're able to win this game in Baltimore. Vital game. I am very much looking forward to seeing it. So that's this week's train of thought. There's no one at the station because there are no buys. And everyone's playing from here on. We've also got a monster Saturday slate full of football, college football playoff stuff. The 2 games I just talked about. It is a heavy, heavy day in terms of football. We made it this far in the year, and we're going to get some awesome Christmas presents pre-Christmas and then games on Christmas. Which brings me to next week. So what I'll end up doing probably on Tuesday is doing a little bit of both. An abbreviated power rankings where you will see the thoughts in the description below, the 3 words or less, all that. And I'll go through it kind of speed run and also do that with the Railway Path video as well. So it'll be one super video since there are games coming on Wednesday, on Christmas Day, and then obviously for the rest of that week. But as always, you will see my picks on the Sports Lounge page. There will be a link provided when I make them. And Chargers Broncos, you will be the first stop of my next train of thought.